When Elizabeth Beth Harrison reviewed the hidden camera footage she'd installed to justify firing her housekeeper, she saw something that made her shake. It wasn't theft. It wasn't negligence. It was something that she, the mother herself, had never managed to do in 6 years. And in that moment, Beth understood she'd been blind. Completely, utterly blind. If you've ever felt like the world was against you, that no one saw you, that you were invisible, stay. Because this story is going to change the way you look at the people who fade into the background of your life, the ones you don't even notice. Beth Harrison was 42 years old and the CEO of one of the largest cosmetics corporations in the United States. Her face graced the covers of business magazines. Her name was synonymous with success, but there was something in Beth's life that no cover story mentioned, something she herself avoided mentioning. Ethan, her 6-year-old son with Down syndrome. It wasn't that Beth didn't love Ethan. The problem was more complicated than that. She simply didn't know how to love him. When Ethan was born, and the doctors gave her the diagnosis, the boy's father, a businessman Beth had met at a conference, disappeared, literally vanished. He signed away his parental rights and was never seen again. Beth was left alone with a baby she didn't know how to care for, and she did what she always did when faced with a problem. She hired someone to solve it. But first, she tried to connect with Ethan. For the first few months, Beth read every book on Down syndrome she could find. She spent hours researching treatments, therapies, methods, but when it came time to sit with her son, to look him in the eyes, to sing him a lullaby, something locked up inside her. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to act. She felt like she was talking to a stranger, and that stranger was her own flesh and blood. The first nanny lasted 3 months. The second, 4. The third, only 6 weeks. Each one left with the same complaint. The child is difficult. The atmosphere is cold. There's no emotional connection in this house. Beth heard them and felt like they were blaming her. But deep down she knew they were right. Nannies, specialized caregivers, occupational therapists. An army of professionals passed through Beth's estate in Ethan's early years. None lasted more than 6 months. Some said the boy was difficult. Others said the atmosphere was cold. Beth never really understood what went wrong. She only knew that Ethan seemed increasingly distant, more withdrawn, more unreachable. But what Beth didn't know, what no one knew, was that something was about to change, and that something had a name, Connie. But everyone called her Mrs. Connie. Mrs. Connie arrived at Beth's estate on a Tuesday in August, responding to an ad for a housekeeper, not for a caregiver, not for a nanny, just cleaning and maintaining the house. Beth didn't even interview her personally. Her assistant took care of everything. She only received a message saying the new employee would start the next day. Mrs. Connie was 67 years old. She was African American, heavy-set. She wore her grey hair pulled back in a tight bun that never came undone. She wore a royal blue uniform with a white apron and yellow cleaning gloves. She walked slowly, with the gait of someone who had carried many burdens in life. But she had eyes. Eyes that seemed to see things others didn't. On her first day, Mrs. Connie cleaned the kitchen, organized the pantry, washed the windows in the living room. She did everything that was in her contract, and nothing more. But something happened when she was dusting the furniture in the second-floor hallway. She heard a sound, a soft sound, like a whimper, or maybe a muffled cry. It came from the room at the end of the hall, the room that Beth's assistant had told her wasn't necessary to clean because the boy had his own caregiver. Mrs. Connie stopped. She looked towards the closed door. The sound came again. It was a small, almost imperceptible moan, like that of an injured animal that no longer has the strength to cry out, and for a moment something tightened in her chest. An old pain. A pain she knew too well. It was the same sound Liam made when he was little and felt alone. The same whimper of despair that she had learned to recognize during the 7 years she cared for her grandson. Mrs. Connie squeezed the cleaning cloth in her hands. Her knuckles turned white with the pressure. She felt her heart beat hard against her ribs, as if it wanted to escape her chest and run to that room. But she didn't go in. It wasn't her place. Not that day. Mrs. Connie's first 2 weeks at the estate were normal. She cleaned. She cooked when asked. She kept everything spotless. Beth barely saw her because she came home after 10 at night and left before 6 in the morning. The house was managed by the assistant, and the assistant was efficient. Everything worked like a machine, but Mrs. Connie kept hearing that sound. Every afternoon, always at the same time, a moan, a cry, something coming from that room at the end of the hall. One day, Ethan's caregiver didn't show up. She called saying she was sick. Beth's assistant panicked, trying to find a replacement, and while she was making desperate calls, Mrs. Connie found herself alone in the second-floor hallway, and the door to Ethan's room was ajar. What Mrs. Connie saw when she peeked in was a boy sitting on the floor, alone, rocking back and forth, staring into nothing. There were expensive toys scattered all over the room, toys that clearly no one used. The boy wasn't crying, but he had an expression on his face that Mrs. Connie recognized instantly. It was the expression of someone who had stopped hoping. And in that moment, Mrs. Connie remembered. She remembered Liam, her grandson, the boy she had lost 8 years ago in a car accident. Liam also had Down syndrome. Liam also rocked when he was alone. Liam also had that look when no one paid attention to him. Mrs. Connie felt her legs tremble. She shouldn't go in. It wasn't her job. She wasn't paid for this. But her feet moved on their own. She sat on the floor a few feet from Ethan. She didn't say anything. She didn't try to touch him. She just sat there, silently, looking in the same direction he was looking. 5 minutes passed. 10, 15. And then Ethan turned his head. Just a little, enough to glance at her sideways. Mrs. Connie didn't move. Ethan looked forward again. But something had changed. When the caregiver finally arrived 2 hours later, she found Ethan asleep in his bed, peaceful, with no trace of distress. The caregiver thought it had been an easy day. She had no idea what had transpired. And Mrs. Connie said nothing. But the next day, when she finished cleaning, she walked past that hallway again, and the door was ajar once more. And Ethan was there, rocking back and forth, and Mrs. Connie went inside. This time she brought something with her, a sheet of paper and some crayons she had found in a kitchen drawer. She sat on the floor and started to draw. Nothing elaborate. Just a sun. A house. A tree. Ethan stopped rocking. He looked at her. And Mrs. Connie held out a yellow crayon. For a moment that seemed eternal. Nothing happened. But then, slowly, very slowly, Ethan's small hand reached out and took the crayon. He didn't draw anything. He just held it. But for Mrs. Connie, that was enough. She felt tears welling up, but she held them back. She didn't want to scare the boy. She didn't want him to think something was wrong. So she took a deep breath, smiled, and kept drawing beside him. That day, when she left Ethan's room, Mrs. Connie went to the downstairs service bathroom. She closed the door and cried silently for 10 minutes. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude, because Liam had taught her something. He had taught her that some children need time, that some children need patience, that some children speak with their eyes before they speak with their mouths. And Ethan had the same eyes as Liam, eyes that pleaded for help without knowing how to ask, eyes that sought connection in a world that didn't understand them. Mrs. Connie looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. She saw an old woman, tired, her hands cracked from years of cleaning other people's houses. But she also saw something more. She saw a woman who still had something to give, a woman whose heart, despite all the pain, still knew how to love. And in that moment she made a decision. She was going to take care of this boy, not because she was paid, not because it was her job, but because Liam had asked her to. From wherever he was, her grandson had sent her this child, and she wasn't going to fail him. It had begun. If this story is touching something inside you, if you're feeling something you can't quite name, I ask you for one thing. Just one. Think of someone who did something for you without being asked, someone who saw you when you were invisible, because what comes next will require you to have that memory present. The weeks went by, and without anyone noticing, Mrs. Connie had established a routine. She arrived at the estate an hour earlier than her contract stated. She finished her cleaning chores quickly, and then, when no one was watching, she went to Ethan's room. The official caregiver had fixed hours. She arrived at 9, left at 5, but there were empty moments. Moments when Ethan was left alone. And in those moments, Mrs. Connie appeared. She had created something. A system. Colored cards with simple drawings. A sun meant going out to the garden. A bed meant rest. A smiling face meant play. Ethan didn't speak. The doctors had said he might never speak clearly. But with those cards, he had found a way to communicate. And there was something else. A song. Mrs. Connie sang it softly, almost whispering. It was an African song that her grandmother had taught her when she was a child in Savannah. A simple, repetitive, hypnotic melody. When she sang it, Ethan stopped rocking. His eyes focused. His breathing calmed. It was like magic, but it wasn't magic. It was something much simpler and much rarer. It was love. Unconditional love. Without schedules. Without contracts. The kind of love that Elizabeth Harrison, with all her money and all her power, hadn't managed to give her own son. And the thing is, love can't be bought. It doesn't matter how many zeros are in your bank account. It doesn't matter how many degrees hang on your wall. It doesn't matter how many companies you run or how many magazine covers feature your picture. Love is something else. Love is sitting on the cold floor of a room for hours, waiting for a child who doesn't know you to decide to trust you. Love is singing the same song 100 times because that song calms him. Love is creating a communication system with colored cards because the doctors said the child would never speak. Love is persisting when everyone has given up. And Mrs. Connie had that kind of love. She had learned it with Liam. She had perfected it during 7 years of caring for a child that the world considered different. And now she was freely giving it to another child who needed exactly the same thing. But Mrs. Connie wasn't thinking about that. Mrs. Connie was only thinking about Ethan, about that child who reminded her so much of Liam, about that opportunity to do what she couldn't do for her grandson. A second chance. And while all this was happening, Elizabeth Harrison was completely unaware. She lived her life of meetings and trips and interviews. She saw Ethan perhaps 15 minutes a day, and in those 15 minutes the boy seemed the same as always. Distant. Disconnected. A problem that she had learned to manage but not to solve. What Elizabeth didn't know was that Ethan was keeping something. Something he only showed when she wasn't around. But that was about to change. Because one day, something disappeared from the estate, and Elizabeth Harrison was about to discover what the cameras could really show. It all started on a Friday night. Elizabeth arrived home after a 3-day trip to New York. She was exhausted. She just wanted to sleep. But when she entered her room and opened the jewelry box where she kept her most valuable pieces, she felt her heart stop. Her grandmother's diamond necklace was gone. It was a unique piece, valued at over $200,000, but its real value was sentimental. It was the only thing she had left of the woman who had raised her when her own parents were too busy to do so. Elizabeth checked the entire jewelry box, checked the drawers, checked under the bed. The necklace simply wasn't there, and then she started to think. The only person who entered her room regularly was the housekeeper. That new woman, the old one. What was her name? Connie. Yes, Connie. Elizabeth didn't want to be unfair. She didn't want to accuse without proof. But the suspicion was there. Growing. Poisoning. The next day, she called a security company. She wanted cameras. all over the house, especially in her room, in the main hallway, and in the kitchen. Discreet cameras. Invisible. That recorded everything without anyone knowing. The technician came that same weekend when Mrs. Connie wasn't there. He installed 8 cameras in total, all connected to an app on Elizabeth's cell phone. Now I'm going to catch her, Elizabeth thought. Now I'm going to see the truth. But the truth Elizabeth Beth Harrison was about to see had nothing to do with jewelry, and when she finally did see it, her life would never be the same. 5 days passed. Beth reviewed the security footage every night, fast-forwarding through the boring parts, searching for any suspicious behavior. She found nothing. The housekeeper, Mrs. Connie, cleaned, cooked, did her job. She didn't enter forbidden areas. She didn't touch things she wasn't supposed to touch. It was frustrating. But Beth was patient. She knew thieves eventually made mistakes. What Beth didn't know was that there was one camera that she herself had forgotten to check. The camera in the second-floor hallway. The one pointing towards Ethan's room. It was on the 6th day when everything changed. Beth was in her office, on a break between meetings, when she decided to check the live camera feeds. She opened the app, selected the second-floor hallway camera, and what she saw made her slowly sink back into her chair. The housekeeper, Mrs. Connie, was entering Ethan's room. Beth felt a surge of indignation. That woman had no business being in there. Ethan's room was the territory of his official caregiver. No one else was supposed to enter. It was a clear rule. But before she could call and demand explanations, something stopped her. Ethan was sitting on the floor. And when Mrs. Connie entered, he looked up. Beth knew her son. She knew that Ethan never looked up when someone entered, not even when she visited him in her scarce free moments. The boy remained locked in his world, oblivious to everything. But now, he was looking at this woman. Beth leaned closer to her phone screen. Mrs. Connie sat down on the floor, about 6 feet from Ethan. She took something from her pocket. They appeared to be colored flashcards. She spread them out on the floor in front of her. One had a picture of a sun, another a bed, another a smiling face. And then she did something that Beth had never seen before. Ethan crawled towards her, on his own, without anyone forcing him. The boy looked at the flashcards. He reached out his small hand and touched the one with the smiling face, and Mrs. Connie smiled. Beth felt something tighten in her chest, something she couldn't identify. A strange, unknown emotion. She kept watching. Mrs. Connie began to sing. A soft, repetitive melody. In a language Beth didn't recognize. Maybe old Portuguese. Maybe something African. The woman sang softly, while Ethan stared at her, and then something impossible happened. Ethan began to move his lips. No sound came out. There were no clear words. But the boy was trying to follow the song. He was trying to sing. Beth almost dropped her phone, and in 6 years, no therapist, no specialist, no professional had managed to get Ethan to even attempt to vocalize something. The doctors said he probably would never speak, that his condition was severe, that they had to accept his limitations. And now, a housekeeper, a woman who wasn't even hired to care for him, was achieving the impossible. Beth closed the app. She stared at the black screen of her phone for several minutes. She didn't know what to think. She didn't know what to feel. But she knew she needed to see more. That night, Beth arrived home earlier than usual. She stopped by Ethan's room. The boy was asleep, peaceful, with an expression of peace she had rarely seen on his face. On the nightstand were some colored flashcards, folded carefully. Beth picked them up. She examined them. Each one had a simple drawing, and a word written on the back: sun, bed, food, play, music, Mom, Mom. Beth stared at that flashcard for a long time. Her son had a communication system, a language of his own, and she didn't know it. She had no idea. But someone else did know. Someone who cleaned the floors and washed the dishes had discovered a way to reach her son that she had never found. What kind of mother am I, Beth thought. What kind of mother doesn't know her own child? But the guilt didn't last long, because Elizabeth Beth Harrison wasn't the type of person who wallowed in uncomfortable emotions. She was an executive, a problem solver. And now she had new information to process. For the next 3 days, Beth dedicated herself to studying the recordings as if they were quarterly reports. She fast-forwarded, paused, took mental notes. What she saw was slowly destroying her, bit by bit. Mrs. Connie arrived at 7 in the morning, an hour before her official schedule. She quickly cleaned the essentials, and then, when no one was watching, she went up to Ethan's room. Beth saw how the woman sat on the floor each day. She saw how she used the flashcards to communicate. She saw how she sang that strange song that seemed to hypnotize the boy. She saw how, little by little, day after day, Ethan got closer, relaxed more, trusted more. She saw how Mrs. Connie showed him pictures from an old book, pictures of animals, of landscapes, of people, and how she pointed to each image and pronounced its name slowly, as if waiting for Ethan to repeat it. She saw how the woman did exercises with the boy's hands, simple movements, open, close, point, clap, things that therapists charged hundreds of dollars to do. And she saw something else. One afternoon, while reviewing a recording from the previous day, Beth saw Mrs. Connie take something from her pocket. It was an old photograph, worn at the edges. It showed a small child, maybe 4 or 5 years old, with the unmistakable features of Down syndrome. Mrs. Connie looked at the photo for a long moment, and then she pressed it against her chest and closed her eyes. Beth saw the woman's shoulders tremble. She was crying. Silently, without making a sound, but she was crying, and at that moment, Beth understood something. That woman wasn't doing this for money. She wasn't doing it out of obligation. She wasn't doing it because someone had asked her to. She was doing it because she had lost something or someone. And in Ethan, she had found a reason to keep going. But there's something you need to know. Something that Beth still didn't know at that moment. Something that would change everything. Beth decided to investigate. She wanted to know more about Mrs. Connie, who she was, where she came from, why she was working at 67 years old cleaning the houses of rich people. She called her assistant and asked for the employee's complete file. What she found was simple, too simple. Connie Maria dos Santos, 67 years old, born in Salvador, Bahia, widow, no fixed address registered, employment references from 3 previous houses, all with excellent comments. But there was a note in the margin, one that the employment agency had added as an observation. The caregiver mentioned during the interview that she'd looked after a grandson with special needs for several years. Sadly, the child passed away in an accident about 8 years ago. Beth read that note 3 times. A grandson with special needs who had died. Suddenly, everything clicked. The way Mrs. Connie looked at Ethan, the endless patience, the quiet dedication, the faded photograph she kept in her pocket. This woman wasn't just caring for Ethan as part of a job. She was tending to the memory of someone who was gone. Beth felt incredibly small, for the first time in a long time. She felt truly insignificant. She'd hired nannies from elite agencies. She'd paid the best therapists. She'd invested a fortune in specialists who promised results, and none of them had achieved what this woman was accomplishing silently, without asking for anything in return, because none of them possessed what Mrs. Connie had, a broken heart that still knew how to love. Beth dwelled on that phrase for a long time. A broken heart that still knew how to love. What did that really mean? It meant that pain doesn't have to destroy you. It meant that losing someone doesn't empty you completely. It meant that, if you choose, you can transform suffering into something different, into something good. Mrs. Connie had lost her grandson in the cruelest way possible. She'd seen him die in her arms. She'd heard his last breath. She'd carried that burden for 8 long years, working in the homes of wealthy families who probably didn't even know her full name. And still, she continued to love, continued to care, continued to give. Beth, on the other hand, had everything. Money, power, success, a living son who needed her. And what had she done with it all? She had squandered it. She'd built walls instead of bridges. She'd hired strangers to do the job she should be doing. What kind of person am I? Beth wondered. And for the first time in her life, she didn't have an answer that comforted her. And while Beth was contemplating all of this, while she was processing what she was discovering, there was something she hadn't seen yet, something in the more recent recordings, something that would make her shudder. And here comes the part that's really going to hit you. But you need to hear it. Because what Beth saw next wasn't just about Ethan. It was about herself. About all the overworking mothers. About all the parents who believe they can compensate for absence with money. About all of US who forget that love cannot be outsourced. Beth was reviewing the recordings from Tuesday, the day before. It was almost 4 in the afternoon in the video. Mrs. Connie was in Ethan's room, as always. But something was different. The boy was standing, not sitting, standing, in front of Mrs. Connie, looking directly into her eyes. Beth had never seen Ethan maintain eye contact with anyone for more than 2 seconds. It was one of his characteristics. He avoided gazes. He withdrew into himself. But there he was, gazing at this woman as if she were the only thing that existed in the world. And then, Mrs. Connie extended her arms, and Ethan walked towards her, not running. Walked, step by step, focused, until he reached the woman's arms and allowed himself to be enveloped in a hug. Beth held her breath. Mrs. Connie stroked Ethan's hair as she embraced him, and then, very softly, began to sing that song, the same one as always, the African lullaby. And Ethan opened his mouth, and from that mouth came a sound. It wasn't a clear word, it wasn't a phrase, it was more like an attempt, a rhythmic babble. But it was something. It was more than Beth had heard from her son in 6 years. Tears started streaming down Beth's face before she even realized she was crying. She continued watching the recording. Mrs. Connie separated from the hug and looked Ethan in the eyes. She said something to him. Beth turned the volume up to maximum to hear. "That's right, my boy. That's right. Grandma Connie is proud of you. Very proud." Grandma Connie. The boy was calling her grandma, and Mrs. Connie was responding as if she were. Beth felt something break inside her. Something she had built up over years. A wall, a defense. The illusion that she was doing the right thing by maintaining distance, by paying others to do what she didn't know how to do. That wall crumbled in that moment, because Beth understood the truth. It wasn't that she didn't know how to love Ethan. It was that she had stopped trying. And while she was abandoning ship, while she was giving up, while she was signing checks and hiring strangers, a 67-year-old woman who cleaned floors had taken her place, a woman who had lost her own grandson, a woman who carried a pain that Beth couldn't even imagine, a woman who, instead of becoming bitter, had decided to use that pain to heal another child. Beth closed the app. She sat in the darkness of her office for almost an hour. She didn't know what to do with what she had discovered. She didn't know how to proceed. But she knew she had to see Mrs. Connie. She had to talk to her. She had to understand, and she had to thank her, because what that woman was doing was priceless, literally priceless. However, before Beth could do anything, before she could process everything she had seen, before she could decide what to say or how to say it, she received a call. It was her mother. And what her mother had to say would change everything once again. Regina Harrison, Beth's mother, was 71 years old and lived in a luxury apartment in the most exclusive area of the city. She was an elegant, cold woman, the kind who considered showing emotions an unforgivable weakness. Beth had inherited many things from her: ambition, perfectionism, and unfortunately, also the inability to connect emotionally with the people she loved most. Regina's call was brief, direct, as always. "Elizabeth, I need to talk to you. It's about something I took from your house. I need you to come by tomorrow." Beth felt a chill. "Something you took? What thing, Mother?" "Your grandmother's necklace. I needed it for an event. I was going to return it to you, but I forgot." Beth remained silent for several seconds. The necklace. The diamond necklace. The one she thought had been stolen. The one that had led her to install cameras. The one that had made her suspect Mrs. Connie. All this time, it had been her own mother. "Mother, I've spent the past week thinking I'd been robbed." "Don't be dramatic, Elizabeth. I'll return it to you tomorrow." The line went dead. Beth stared at the phone. She felt a mixture of relief and anger that she didn't know how to process. Relief, because Mrs. Connie was innocent. Obviously she was innocent. There had never been any theft. Anger, because she had suspected a woman who didn't deserve such suspicion. But more than anything, she felt shame. She had installed cameras to catch a thief, and instead, she had discovered an angel that night. Beth couldn't sleep. She stayed awake thinking about everything she had seen in the recordings, thinking about Mrs. Connie, about Ethan, about the grandson that woman had lost, about the colorful flashcards, about the African lullaby, about that hug her son had voluntarily given to a stranger when he had never hugged his own mother like that. And she asked herself a question that pained her to ask. Why does he hug her and not me? The answer was obvious, painfully obvious, because she is present, because she sees him, because she tries every day, without expecting anything in return. And me? I just signed checks. The next morning, Beth did something she never did. She cancelled all her meetings. She told her assistant she was unavailable to anyone, and she stayed home. She stayed home to see. Not through cameras, not through a screen, in person. She hid in the hallway on the second floor, behind a column, near Ethan's room. And she waited. At 9:15, as indicated by the pattern Beth had observed in the recordings, Mrs. Connie came upstairs. She walked slowly, with that tired step of someone who has worked all their life. She was carrying something in her hand, the colorful flashcards. Beth held her breath as she watched the woman enter her son's room. And then, making as little noise as possible, she approached the ajar door. What she saw made her tremble. Mrs. Connie was sitting on the floor, as always. Ethan was in front of her, but not just sitting. He was kneeling, leaning forward, staring at the flashcards the woman was holding. Mrs. Connie pointed to the flashcard with the smiley face. "What is this? Sweetie, what does this picture mean?" And Ethan opened his mouth. Hap. P. The word came out haltingly, imperfectly. But it was a word that Beth had never heard from her son's lips. Beth had to cover her mouth to keep from making a sound. Tears began to fall, and uncontrollably. Mrs. Connie smiled with a tenderness that seemed impossible for someone her age. "Very good, Ethan. Very good. And this one?" "What is this one?" She pointed to the flashcard with the sun. Ethan looked at the drawing. He frowned in concentration. And then, slowly, he pronounced, "Son. Perfect. My perfect boy." Mrs. Connie extended her arms, and Ethan let himself be embraced. And as she hugged him, she began to sing that melody, that lullaby that Beth didn't know, but that clearly meant something profound to both of them. And then something happened that Beth didn't expect. Ethan lifted his head from the hug. He looked Mrs. Connie directly in the eyes and said something that sounded like a whisper, but that Beth heard perfectly from her hiding place. "Con, ni," and a second later, "Love. You." Beth had to hold onto the wall to keep from falling. Her son had said, "Love you." Her son, who the doctors said might never speak clearly, had uttered the two most important words that exist, and he hadn't said them to her. He had said them to a 67-year-old housekeeper who cleaned floors and washed dishes. Some people are going to pause here. They're going to need a moment before they keep listening. And that's okay. Take that moment, because what comes next is just as intense. And if you feel like this is affecting you, it's because this story is speaking to something we all know, but don't want to admit. That love cannot be bought, that time cannot be recovered, that children don't wait for us to be successful to need us. They need us now, today, in this moment. Beth pulled away from the door. She walked to her room with trembling steps. She sat on the bed and cried as she hadn't cried in years. They weren't tears of sadness, not exactly. They were tears of recognition of everything she had failed at, of everything she had avoided, of all the times she had chosen a meeting over a hug, a business trip over a night at home, a contract over a lullaby. And in that recognition, there was something else. There was a decision. Beth was going to talk to Mrs. Connie. She was going to tell her what she knew. She was going to thank her. But first, she needed to understand something else. She needed to know the whole story. That afternoon, Beth did something she probably should have done weeks before. She went down to the kitchen, where Mrs. Connie was washing the lunch dishes, and said in the calmest voice she could muster, "Mrs. Connie, can you sit down for a moment? I need to talk to you." The woman looked at her in surprise. In all the months she had been working there, the lady of the house had almost never spoken to her directly. It was always through the assistant. Of course. "Mrs. Harrison, has something bad happened?" "No, nothing bad has happened. I just need to know something." Mrs. Connie dried her hands on her apron and sat down in one of the chairs at the kitchen island. Beth sat down across from her. And for the first time, she really looked at her. She saw the wrinkles that told stories of sun and work. She saw the hands worn out from years of cleaning other people's houses. She saw the tired but kind eyes. She saw a woman who had lived an entire life before arriving at that estate. "Mrs. Connie, tell me about your grandson." The woman remained motionless. Her face changed. The mask of a helpful employee cracked for a moment, showing something beneath, something vulnerable, something painful. "How do you know about my grandson, Mrs. Harrison?" Beth hesitated. She didn't want to admit that she had been spying on her, but she didn't want to lie either. "I saw a photograph. Among your things. I didn't mean to invade your privacy, but I saw it. It was a half-truth." Technically, she had seen the photograph, only through a hidden camera. Mrs. Connie nodded slowly. Her eyes moistened, but she didn't shed any tears. "Liam. My grandson's name was Liam." And then she began to speak. "Liam was born with Down syndrome, just like your Ethan. My daughter, Liam's mother, died in childbirth. Complications. It was very quick. We couldn't do anything. The boy's father was a coward who disappeared before Liam turned 1. Beth felt a lump in her throat. The story was too similar to hers. Mrs. Connie continued. I raised Liam. Since he was a baby, I took him everywhere. To therapists when I could afford it. To doctors in the public system when I couldn't. I taught him everything I know. To communicate with signs, with drawings, with songs. That little tune you probably just heard. It was Liam's favorite. The only thing that would calm him down when he was having a meltdown. Beth didn't say anything. She just listened. When Liam was 7 years old, there was an accident. We were crossing the street. A drunk driver. He didn't see the light. Son, I was able to jump out of the way in time. Liam couldn't. Connie stopped. For the first time since she started talking, a tear rolled down her cheek. He died in my arms, right there in the street, surrounded by strangers who didn't know what to do. He died while I was singing him that song, the same one I sing to your son. Beth reached out and took Connie's hand. She didn't know why she did it. It was an impulse, a human need to connect with someone else's pain. When was this, Mrs. Connie? 8 years ago, ma'am. 8 years, 3 months, and 21 days. Connie looked up like she was counting in her head. And there hasn't been a single day that I don't think about him. Beth squeezed the woman's hand. Why didn't you ever say anything? Why didn't you ever mention that you had experience with special needs children? Because that's not what I was hired for, ma'am. I was hired to clean. And that's what I do. But you help, Ethan. I've seen you. Connie looked her straight in the eye for the first time. You've seen me? Beth nodded. There was a long silence. And then Connie spoke in a voice that was both strong and fragile. Ethan reminds me of Liam. Not in every way. They're different people. But they have the same look. That look of someone who wants to connect but doesn't know how. Of someone who has a lot to say but can't find the words. When I first saw him, alone, in that room full of toys that no one used, I felt like my heart broke all over again. And I thought that maybe, just maybe, if I couldn't save Liam, maybe I could help this boy. Maybe that would give some meaning to everything that happened. Beth felt tears streaming down her own face. He calls you Grandma, Beth said. He calls you Grandma Connie. Connie smiled through her own tears. Yes, it started a couple weeks ago. It was the first clear word he said. Well, almost clear. But I understood it. And you never told me. It wasn't my place, Mom. You're his mother. I'm just the help. Beth shook her head. No. You're not just the help. You're so much more than that. And I've been an idiot for not seeing it sooner. There was another silence, but this silence was different. It was the silence of two people who were finally seeing each other. Connie, I have to confess something to you, and I need you to forgive me. The woman looked at her curiously. A necklace went missing from my room a few weeks ago. It was very valuable, and I thought that maybe you had taken it. Connie's face clouded over. I would never steal anything, Mum. Never in my life have I taken something that didn't belong to me. I know. I know that now. It was my mother who borrowed it and forgot to tell me, but before I knew that, I installed cameras in the house to catch you. Connie's eyes widened in surprise. And what I saw on those cameras wasn't a theft. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. It was you taking care of my son the way I've never known how to. Beth took both of Connie's hands in hers. Forgive me. For suspecting you. For not seeing you. For not knowing what you were doing for my family while I was too busy to notice. Connie looked at her for a long moment. And then, slowly, she smiled. There's nothing to forgive, Mum. You're a good mother. You're just lost. Like I was lost after Liam died. But you find your way. You always find your way. If you didn't get chills from what you just heard, if you didn't feel something move inside you, then maybe you need to ask yourself, when was the last time you really allowed yourself to feel? Because this story isn't about a housekeeper and her employer. It's about all the times we judge someone without knowing their story. All the times we assume the worst of the people we consider beneath us. All the times money and power blind us to the true wealth that's right in front of our eyes. But this story isn't over yet, because what happened next changed the lives of everyone in that house forever. Beth spent the next few days thinking about how to fix things, not just with Connie, with everyone, with Ethan, with herself, with the way she had been living her life. She made some hard decisions. She delegated more responsibilities at the company. She hired a chief operating officer who could handle the day-to-day while she cut back her working hours. She cancelled trips that weren't absolutely necessary. She started coming home before 7 o'clock at night. But the most important thing she did was talk to Ethan, or rather, try to talk. The first time Beth sat on the floor in her son's room, like she had seen Connie do in the recordings, she felt ridiculous. She didn't know what to do with her hands. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know the colored cards or the African song or any of the codes that Connie had created. Ethan looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and distrust. He wasn't used to his mother being in his space. Not like this. Not sitting on the floor at his level. Beth felt her heart pounding. "Hi, Ethan. It's Mom. I came to play with you." The boy didn't respond. He just looked at her. Beth reached for the colored cards that were in a box next to the bed. She found the one with the smiley face. She held it up. "This means happy, right?" Ethan nodded very slowly. "You want to show me the others?" For a moment. Nothing happened. Beth thought she had failed, that her son didn't want anything to do with her, that it was too late. But then, very slowly, Ethan reached out. He sat down next to her. He took the box of cards, and he started to show her each one. Sun, bed, food, music. And when he got to the last card, the one with the word Mom written on it, he held it in front of Beth's face for a long moment. Beth felt something breaking and rebuilding at the same time inside her. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling. "That's me. Mom." Ethan looked her straight in the eye. And then he did something that Beth would remember for the rest of her life. He held his arms out to her, not to Connie, to her. Beth hugged him so tightly that she was afraid of hurting him, but the boy didn't complain. He let himself be hugged, and for the first time in 6 years, Beth felt like she was really connecting with her son. It wasn't too late. It wasn't too late yet. But this doesn't mean that Connie stopped being important. Quite the opposite. Beth proposed something to the woman who had changed everything. "Connie, I want you to stop being the housekeeper." The woman looked at her with alarm. "Are you firing me, ma'am?" "No, I'm promoting you. I want you to be Ethan's official caregiver, with a proper salary, with benefits, with an actual contract, recognizing what you really do in this house." Connie opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Beth continued. "And I want something else. I want you to stop living in that boarding house and where they told me you live. There's a guest room on the 3rd floor. It's spacious. It has its own bathroom. You can decorate it however you want. I want you to live here, with us, as part of the family." Tears began to roll down Connie's face. "Mrs. Harrison, I can't accept that. It's too much. It's not too much. It's only fair. It's what you deserve. And honestly, it's what we need. Ethan needs you. And I need you too. I need you to teach me, to be the mother I should have been. From the beginning." Connie looked at her for a long moment. And then, for the first time since she'd arrived at that estate, she smiled, truly smiled. "All right, Mrs. Harrison, I accept, but on one condition, which is that you let me keep cooking that Sunday pot roast that Master Ethan likes so much." Beth laughed through her tears. "Deal." And that's how Connie Maria dos Santos, a 67-year-old woman, who had lost her grandson in a traffic accident, found a new family. This story shouldn't exist, and it shouldn't be possible for a woman who cleans floors to be more important to a child than his own multimillionaire mother. It shouldn't be possible for selfless love to outweigh all the paid specialists. It shouldn't be possible for someone who carries so much pain to still have so much love to give. But it does. It's real. And if you're feeling something now, it's because you know. Stories like this aren't as rare as we think. They're all around us. We just don't see them, because we don't want to see. The months passed, and things kept improving, with Connie as the official caregiver, and Beth present more and more. Ethan began to blossom, in a way that no one had anticipated. The doctors who had said that the boy might never speak clearly had to eat their words. When Ethan started forming complete sentences, they weren't perfect sentences. He still had difficulties. He still needed therapy, but he was progressing, a little more, each day. And there was something else. He had started calling Beth Mom, not Mom, written on a flashcard. Mom, said with his own voice, the first time he said it. Beth was helping him put on his shoes to go to the park. Connie was preparing a snack in the kitchen. Everything was normal. Routine. Then Ethan lifted his head, looked at Beth and said, Mom, can I take Ball? Beth froze. Ethan looked at her impatiently, like any 6-year-old, waiting for an answer. Ball, Mom, please. Beth nodded, unable to speak. She went to get the ball, her legs trembling. And when she came back and handed it to Ethan, the boy gave her a quick kiss on the cheek and ran toward the door. A kiss, a simple kiss, something that millions of children do every day, without a second thought. But for Beth, it was the most precious moment of her life. That night, after Ethan fell asleep, Beth went to Connie's room. The woman was sitting by the window, looking at an old photograph, the photograph of Liam. Can I come in? Connie nodded. Beth sat beside her. She looked at the picture of the boy who had died so many years ago, a boy who had prepared Connie for this moment, a boy whose death, in some terrible and beautiful way, had saved another. You think Liam would be proud of what you do? Connie smiled, with sadness and love mixed together. I think Liam sent me here. I don't know how. I don't know why. But I think that somehow he knew that I needed Ethan as much as Ethan needed me. Beth took the woman's hand. Thank you, Connica, for everything, for not giving up on my son when I had already given up on myself, for teaching me that love doesn't need diplomas or certifications for being the grandmother Ethan deserves. Connie squeezed her hand. Thank you, Mrs. Harrison, for opening the doors of your home and your heart, for giving me a second chance to be a grandmother. They stayed like that for a moment. Two women who couldn't be more different. One rich, one poor, said one young, said one old money, one white, one black, but united by something, stronger than any difference, united by a child, united by love. 2 years have passed since that afternoon. When Beth first watched the security footage, Ethan is now 8 years older. He goes to an inclusive school, where he has friends. He speaks in complete sentences, although he still needs time to organize his thoughts. He loves music, especially that African lullaby that Grandma Connie taught him. And he's learning to read. Connie is 69 years old and refuses to retire. She says that taking care of Ethan keeps her young. She has her own room, decorated with photos of Liam and Ethan together on the same wall, as if they were brothers, as if time and death couldn't separate them. Beth reduced her work hours by half. She's still CEO, but she delegated more, travels less, comes home in time to have dinner with her son every night and every Sunday. The three of them cook Ethan's favorite pot roast together, while African music plays in the kitchen. Beth's mother, Mrs. Regina, returned the diamond necklace. But Beth no longer wears it. She put it in a safe deposit box and forgot about it. There are things more valuable than diamond, things that can't be kept in boxes, things that only exist when you share them. And the cameras that Beth installed to catch a thief are still there, but she no longer checks them to look for burglaries. Sometimes she watches them to see Connie and Ethan playing when she's not home, to remind herself of what she almost lost, to be grateful that she found something much more valuable than a diamond necklace. She found a family, an imperfect family, broken in some places, rebuilt in others, but a real family. And it all started with a 67-year-old woman who cleaned floors, a woman who carried immense pain and transformed it into love, a woman who saw an invisible child and decided to make him visible, a woman who proved that angels don't have wings or halos. Angels have blue uniforms, white aprons, and yellow cleaning gloves. You have two options now. The first is to close this and forget everything you heard. Go back to your life, to your routines, to your excuses of why you don't have time for the people you love. The second is to remember. Think back to someone in your life who cared for you without being asked, someone who saw you when you felt invisible, someone who gave you something you could never repay. And if you're lucky enough that person is still around, maybe it's time to say thank you, because the Mrs. Connies of this world don't live forever, but the love they give does. This was the story of a wealthy woman who installed security cameras to catch an employee doing wrong and discovered there's nothing more valuable than someone who loves unconditionally. There's nothing more valuable than someone who sees the invisible. There's nothing more valuable than someone who transforms pain into healing. And if this story touched you in some way, if you felt even a little bit of what Elizabeth felt when she watched those recordings, then it served its purpose. Because the stories that really matter are the ones that change us, even if just a little, even if only for today. Because sometimes the most important stories don't make the headlines. They don't have millions of views. Sometimes the most important stories happen in silence, in rooms where nobody's watching, in homes where love hides behind work uniforms, in hearts that choose to keep beating despite the pain. And if you learned one thing from this story, let it be this. Look at the people around you. Really see them. Because maybe there's a Mrs. Connie in your life, waiting to be seen, and maybe, just maybe, that person needs you to say thank you before it's too late. Don't wait. Time waits for no one.